So a bit of the background on Liberty Street Market, just to give you a geographic perspective, the area in where the Liberty Street Vendors Market is located is called the Liberty Street Corridor. And geographically in our city, what we're talking about is around 5 miles from downtown. And it's a 3-mile stretch of Liberty Street from 7th Street up to Smith Reynolds Airport. And this is an area that for many years had a thriving Black business district, but was also plush with grocery stores and options for food, a thriving market as we define it as an economist, right? So I'm an economist, and this idea of market is sort of a competitive place of exchange where buyers can get what they want, sellers can sell what they want. And this area really was that. And so here I've got an article from the Winston-Salem Chronicle that ran in the late 70s that was actually discussing how in 1910, so about 110 years ago, there were over 100 Black grocers in Winston-Salem. And a number of them were very prominent grocery stores in this Liberty Street corridor. So for example, 1701 North Liberty for many years was Alicia's Grocery. Later it was East Side Grocery. The owners of the grocery store were very well known and important leaders within the Winston-Salem community. And over time, as areas of Winston-Salem received much more investment from city planning, taxpayer dollars, revitalization. Here we can think about areas like the Haynes Mall area. We can think about West Salem and the area where Salem College is. There had been concerns, especially in the early 90s, about underinvestment in the Liberty Street corridor area. And so some individuals like the late Mayor Pro Tem Vivian Burke had purchased a number of the buildings, including that grocery store, which remains an existing building, but it's vacant. But even, North Carolina Representative Larry Womble in the early 90s expressed a lot of concern in our local media and across the state about underinvestment in the Liberty Street corridor area. And so it was really around that time in the early 90s that city council members started exploring options to try to revitalize the former Black thriving business district that, again, we're sort of referring to as this 3-mile stretch on Liberty Street, which is where the current Liberty Street Vendors Market is. So the late Mayor Pro Tem Burke represented the Northeast Ward since the late 1970s, and in the 80s, she and a few other city representatives traveled around to get an idea of how vendors markets worked in other areas. For example, they went to California. In the 90s, a group went to Nashville, Tennessee, to really kind of collect some information and craft a development plan for the Liberty Street corridor. And this kind of touring and collecting information to develop a plan received some media press when the Liberty Street Vendors Market opened, kind of saying how they planned and collected this information. Some of the feedback that had been offered in terms of that planning process was, if we think about collecting information on developing markets in the 80s or mid 90s, and the market then was launched in 2014, perhaps the information wasn't quite as relevant or on the spot to where local needs and local demand were by the time that those ribbons were cut. So in 2014, there was a grand opening of the Liberty Street Market. It was slated to be open from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Thursdays through Saturdays. The city spent a good amount of money, about $35,000 designing the market, a little over $300,000 building it. There were some partnerships. The Liberty Community Development Corporation received a loan from the city who managed it. That corporation had some difficult transitions that they were unable as a corporation to kind of emerge from in terms of changing in leaderships. They had a longtime leader that stepped down. There was also a contract for the market to be managed by an individual who at the time was with the corporation, but then departed the corporation as well. And so there was a good amount of sort of logistical management challenges around how the market was managed, who was managing it, as well as some feedback from the city that the demand wasn't what they expected in terms of number of customers and things like that. And so this vision of a thriving produce market, a space where Thursdays through Saturdays, we could address the food desert aspect, the lack of produce and lack of access to nutritious fruits and vegetables, and community engagement that a typical market, vendors market, open air market provides, just wasn't brought to fruition in that initial run. And so it closed after a few months of opening in 2014. And then in 2016, the city formally announced some plans to try to revitalize the space. And so there was our initial city liaison, Regina Hall, who's wonderful and amazing, doing great work in our city right now in the Boston Thurman area. She was part of the city's launching of plans to revitalize. She put together a great YouTube video where it talked about some visions to revitalize the space, and also offered the space up for rental by community members. And so it was a pretty fair price if you consider the vastness of the space and the various amenities offered. So there's about 70 parking spots. One of the two pavilions is glassed in with sort of bay, I know they're not called garage doors, but they're sort of bay doors that lift up like garage doors. There's a lot of electric outlets, and they were offering at the $45 park pavilion rental fee. There was also a lot of concerns that were being collected by citizens in terms of the space being fenced off. And so part of this vision was to get that geography right. And so it's so close to Cleveland area homes. It's so close to a complete dearth of access to produce and community gathering spaces. And that kind of that iron fencing in may limit some of that community engagement.
I have a lot of plant material that I need to get out anyways, because it's all over the place. Yeah. So as long as you're here, we could. We can bottom up.
And then in 2017, there was another short stint of an opening. It was pitched as an urban farmers market. It was mostly urban farmers who had graduated from farm school at Co-op Extension. But again, this was only a few months starting in July 2017. And the Urban Food Policy Council, since we began about 3.5, 4 years ago, has always been tasked by the city in making recommendations for both the Liberty Street Vendors Market as well as the Carolina Classic Farmers Market over on Coliseum. And this was really an area that we were excited to begin working and exploring opportunities to utilize such an important geographic location and such an important vision in terms of addressing the food desert and the disappearance of so many grocery options and community gathering spaces for the Liberty Street corridor. So during the COVID shutdown, the council wrote and was funded with a grant through Community Food Strategies, which is out of NC State. They provided us a grant to do a pilot run of the Liberty Street Market, both addressing concerns of the COVID shutdown, less market access in terms of ability to go to inside grocery stores, but also for producers having much more restricted opportunities to vend what they were growing. And we were also very grateful to not only have a grant funded by Community Food Strategies Network, but to have immediate support from the city. So not only was Tiffany instrumental in doing so much behind the scenes work on the back end, but the city also provided a lot of support through finance, through getting SNAP and EBT accepted and managing the SNAP EBT. They also provided a good amount of staffing. And while the grant covered the rental fees for the Liberty Street Market to run from July through October, the city waived those fees for us, and that allowed us to not charge vendors, to do they paid for some mailings. We did some couponing, trying to also send out some media to local residents, giving some coupons that specifically extended SNAP and EBT amounts. And we began in July. We operated Friday afternoons. That time and day was voted on as the most popular by the vendors who were interested in selling at the market. And we were open every other week, July through the beginning of November. We extended a bit just because the weather was good enough and our vendors were still pulling good stuff out of the ground. We had a soft launch and then more of a formal grand opening a couple weeks later. That soft launch allowed us to kind of figure out what was working, what wasn't working. When should we hang signage? When should we open the gates? How do we get the good word out to make sure that when vendors spend their time and money to bring stuff to market, that they were able to move all of the things that they brought?
All right, so I will talk a little bit about where we're going from here this year with the Liberty Street Market. As Megan mentioned, working on the Liberty Street Market is, to a degree, part of their role as the Urban Food Policy Council from a recommendation standpoint, but they really took it a step further, when they helped to staff the market, when they helped to write the policies and procedures, when they helped to advertise and get vendors on board. So it was really a huge lift for them, and they really exceeded anything that they were expected to do. And so I was really happy to support on the effort. So next steps for the market for this year, I have sent out reapplications to all of our vendors and farmers that vended last year. And so waiting for responses on that. This piece is really critical because I'm trying to collect information about availability. We're trying to make a determination on, are we going to continue hosting the market every other Friday, the first and the third Friday from 4 to 6 p.m.? And is that what works best for our urban farmers and vendors? Or do we need to adjust? Because at the end of the day, we can't have a market without our farmers and vendors. So this whole initiative from the beginning has really been trying to get that grassroots support, trying to understand what works for our farmers and vendors and making decisions based on that information. So I'm collecting that information now. So far, it does seem like that Friday 4 to 6 is going to be the time that still continues to work for our farmers and vendors. As far as the frequency, is it going to be the first and third Friday? Will it be more often? I still need to evaluate that data, but at least we have a kind of a sense of it, of the date and time. And once that I finish collecting the applications from those vendors and farmers, we will extend the application out to the broader public. I hope to do that by April 19th, which will give us the chance to have some planning still in place and be able to goal launch for Friday, May 21st. That is the time that the farmers and vendors that we have been working with have let us know will be best for them in terms of when they've begun planting and when they'll actually have harvest. We have had SNAP EBT at the market. We have now switched to receiving some state support for SNAP EBT. So that's going to reduce some of the costs that we had to spend on transactions for SNAP EBT. So that's great. We'll be implementing that system and trying it out and have it ready for May 21st. The SNAP EBT process for our farmers and vendors is really simple. Most markets, you're familiar, use tokens. we have been using something called Snap Bucks, and they're used in much the same way. So your SNAP EBT recipients will come up to a table, let us know about how much they plan to spend. We'll give them the exchange of the SNAP Bucks, and they'll be able to spend that with our farmers and vendors that accept SNAP EBT. I will note that we do not require all of our vendors and farmers to accept SNAP EBT. Some of them, their products do not qualify for SNAP EBT. And for those that do, it's still an option. It's completely up to them. We do have a new vendor agreement form that we're working on developing. Since last year, really the Urban Food Policy Council ran it in-house, and now the city, under my wheelhouse with food resilience programs, is going to continue managing it for this year. We're trying to develop some criteria, not too much that's going to inhibit or exclude anyone from participating, but just enough to protect our urban farmers and vendors, especially because we're going to be adding a component this year where our community gardeners are eligible to vend. And so usually urban farmers, because they're vending in multiple markets, will have different certifications, will have different types of insurance. Our community gardeners are less likely to have that. And so we need to build out this form to protect them, also to protect the city and to protect our residents. And so I will have that available as well for our farmers and vendors when they do apply. And it will also be available when we publish our, I think I'll talk about it in the next slide, Liberty Street Market website. So some things that we're looking on adding in, I'm calling it version 2.0, being 1.0 being last year, although we know there was 0.001 and 0.002 and whatever, but marketing wise, we're going to be increasing some marketing efforts. Last year we send out mailers and bulletins to households that use SNAP EBT as currency within a 3-mile radius. We're going to expand that radius with our mailers this year. We're also going to work on partnering with area churches, trying to get it into church bulletins, and also trying to get our area pastors or area reverends to make announcements about the market. And also, with community gardens being able to vend at the market, maybe some of these churches would also like to sell some of the produce that they're growing. A lot of our churches in the community do have community gardens, so that might be an option to partner as well. We also will be launching yeah.
If I could add one thing, I think that maybe I glossed over is that the city also came to the market. The city came out to a number of markets. Any given market, we would have a number of individuals who just came by to get a sense of it, to really experience it. And I think I think it's all right to call it version 2.0, because what had happened in the past was the city wasn't running the market in the same way that the city runs the Carolina Classic Farmers Market. This is a taxpayer-owned, locally owned space, a city space, but I think what we were able to do through this pilot program was show to the city, who was collaborating with us and putting a lot of staffing into it, that it's a great space, and the city really wanted it to be involved as a public space rather than that private partnership.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, that's really important. Our city manager's office and our city council members were really pleased with what the Urban Food Policy Council was able to do. And from the feedback, of course, as Megan described, there's a long history behind it. And when we first started, we did receive a lot of that feedback and concerns that Megan mentioned. But moving forward, I heard a lot from community members about how pleased they were about the initiative we were taking on the feedback that they gave us. And that's something we want to continue to do. And all these items I've outlined on this slide are, have come out of community feedback, have come out of case studies done by college students, have come out by recommendations of the Urban Food Policy Council. And this is not the end. This is, what we're trying to pilot and test this year. Will continue to change throughout this year based on community feedback, maybe based on even some of the ideas that you all have as attendees here today. And we'll continue to adjust so that it is a true public community space. and that we're, considering our vendors and farmers first and foremost. And I hope that point really gets across in any decision that we're making. We're trying to consider their needs, their availability, their schedules, the products that they're vending, so on and so forth. Moving forward, so we also want to work on incorporating live music and art demonstrations, but really to do that, lifting up area community and social capital. So not necessarily bringing in musicians from Pofftown or Louisville or West Winston-Salem, but really trying to see what artists that we have within, a 5-mile radius of that market, and prioritizing those people, much like we have with our farmers and vendors. Because I don't think, Megan, you mentioned this, but we do prioritize our urban farmers and vendors that are creating their product or growing their product within a 5-mile radius of that Liberty Street Market. Now, that doesn't mean that people beyond that 5-mile radius can't come and vend. It just means if we run out of space, we do have to remember that priority of geographic area. And I think, go ahead, Megan. Looks like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, and I think there, again, not to sort of put this economist hat on, but when we use this idea of a thriving market, part of the opportunity in this geography is the food desert, the lack of access residents, consumers have. But the other half that's important, that's really, part of our mission and vision with the market, is on the seller's end, the producer's end, individuals having access to sustainable livelihoods and creating a sustainable livelihood path for individuals who produce those healthy, nutritious, fruits and vegetable based inputs to a quality of life, and so it's both sides, both the growing end, the producing end, as well as the consumer buying end, that we really prioritize being a neighborhood event, a community development, sustainable local event, because we know larger farmers, larger spaces of land, larger so areas that have just a larger scale of operation, have access to different market outlets, whether that's various retail outlets, various restaurants, or other existing farmers markets. And so when we really add to the food landscape of our broader Winston-Salem community, we want to also design a market that prioritizes producers who don't have as much market access, vending access in some of our existing opportunities.
And that carries over with our artists and with our musicians, just trying to, again, create opportunity within that core area and uplifting what's there. And our Urban Food Policy Council was a huge proponent of that. So another item is, you'll notice a lot of this is trying to build more partnerships. And that's going to be really critical for us as we develop this into a true community space. But partnering with local schools, something I left off here, but also recreation centers. Carol Eichmeyer was a big proponent of that as well, coming up with having students come out for field trips, learning about how those farmers and vendors produce their products, getting to talk with the farmers and vendors, getting to do activities that kind of promote that whole child well-being. So, getting the healthy food, maybe we have some jump ropes out there, maybe there's some activities we partner with the recreation center to put in place. And I'm going to skip down a little bit because I think it ties in, but also partnering with area restaurants and nutritionists. Again, looking at that whole picture of health for youth, but also, for our families, for our adults, for our seniors. Are there restaurant owners, chefs in the area within that radius that are going to be willing to come out, maybe try to cook up a meal with some of the produce that's being vended right there in the spot, and having a nutritionist, again, from within that community, if we can identify one, to be able to share about healthy eating and talk about that whole process. So those pieces all really tie in together, as well as with inviting area food trucks. So it's a common theme, partnerships, really focusing in first on that localized area and then shifting out if we're not able to build a connection at the time. That doesn't mean if, say for some reason we can't find a nutritionist in that area that we can work with at the time, we might, expand beyond that 5-mile radius, but we're going to always come back to that. So just because one time we might have went out of the area doesn't mean that in the future we're not going to try to continue to meet that commitment and that priority we've made. The other thing we want to really strive to do is do greater data collection. Ask for customer experience. Ask for, as people come into the market, what could be better? What would have made your experience better? What products are we missing? What do you really want to see? There's a range of people who were shopping at this market last year. Some of them were community members, some were, driving from a little bit farther. But, asking folks, do they know anyone who wants to vend? Do you know anyone within, they might not know for sure 5 miles, but do you know someone who's growing close by that doesn't know about this opportunity? Can you connect us with them? And we did do some of that this past go around, but in order to ensure the long-term success, we need to start develop, some metrics and measures that we can continuously develop to grow the initiative. And I think I mentioned this a little bit, but also having vendor demonstrations. So we've talked a lot about bringing other folks in, nutritionists, restaurants, food trucks, but also uplifting our vendors and farmers to do demonstrations on their own work. If we have someone who is producing honey, is there some sort of demonstration that they can do with bottling their honey? I'm not sure, but what is it that we can do to make it more of an experience, to make it more of a learning experience for our customers? And all of these things are really going to enhance the marketing that we do. So all of this really feeds back into each other. And Megan, I noticed you looked like you wanted to add something.
Well, and I was also going to say that, continuity is going to be important on both ends of the market, but especially on the vendors, producers, et cetera, affiliated with the market, because again, not to be that agriculturalist, but planting decisions take place many, many months in advance. And so once local producers come to sort of settle on the reliance of the regular pattern of this market, they'll also, in a way, extend the network of people considering vending, because there's such risk at sort of planting and not knowing, will there be the local demand? Will there be local opportunities to vend what you're producing? And so I think there we're looking at some great opportunities in that medium-term planning horizon. The more this market is regular and takes place for a few years, and individuals start to trust more that it's going to be more permanent than it has in the past.